Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 10. We are talking books and the publishing industry. I think you'll find this chapter very interesting. Certainly, books and publishing have, been at the forefront of not just, I think, obviously our history, but currently, there's never a story that doesn't come up in the news every day about something that doesn't happen to do with books. So in any event, this will be our next to last chapter this semester. We've got advertising, of course, to go. But yeah, so sit back and enjoy this lecture on books, and hopefully you guys will take away some things that you can think about. I certainly think that this is one of the more engaging and interesting chapters of the semester. So let's get to it. All right. So first of all, books are the least of mass media. Now, if I was actually, doing this in a live Zoom lecture or in a class, I would ask you, why is that? Why are books the least of mass media? But, the answer is actually fairly simple. The reason that the books are least of mass media is because in terms of actual number to be successful, to be a bestseller, for example, on the New York Times bestseller list, you only need to sell 125,000 copies of a book. Now, if you translate that to 125,000 people watching a television show, or 125,000 people maybe around the world or in the nation going to see a film, you're going to be an unbelievable flop. So it's just in terms of actual statistic number that books are considered the least of mass media. In fact, let me give you a stat here, and then tell you why books, I think, obviously are from a mass media standpoint, a behemoth. But this is statistic wise. It took 40 years to sell 20 million copies of Gone with the Wind. So 40 years to sell. So if you guys don't know this, that famous film, Gone with the Wind, we talked a little bit about that in our film chapter. That was a book before it was a film, and as are many movies, to be honest with you. Movies do get their inspiration from books, but more than 50 million people watched the movie version in a single evening on television. So 20 million, 40 years to get 20 million copies sold one night, 2-hour window, right? You have 50 million watch the movie in a single evening. So that's why, you literally can call books statistically the least of mass media. But in terms of impression, oh man, they leave a far greater impression on the culture than films and shows. I mean, think about probably, two of the most, obvious examples. You have the Bible, you have the Quran, you also have the Book of Mormon. So obviously you have religious books that, obviously leave a far greater impression than just a television show does. I mean, I think, obviously we're going to be thinking about some television shows and films forever, but in most cases, I would guarantee you that some of what you watch, or most of what you watch, you'll forget about it a year from now. So anyway, 275,000 titles and editions are published in the USA each year. The average price of a book is around $25. That is still the case. I know inflation is obviously a hot button topic this year in 2022, but the average price of a textbook is not textbook, rather, that's much higher. Average price of a hardcover book is around $25. Now, that ranges, of course, there's obviously higher and there's obviously lower, but give or take, it's around 25 bucks. There's several kinds of books out there, including trade books, religious books, of course, professional books. You have book clubs, you have paperbacks, you have textbooks, ebooks. Obviously, some of you obviously love, you have those e-readers that you have now, and of course, digital audio books. So there's just all sorts of different styles of reading material that we have access to, in this modern age. All right, so before I kind of dive into some of the general aspects of the cultural value of a book, we start talking about censorship, we start talking about history. I thought you might find it somewhat entertaining, or at least informative, as to why textbooks continue to be kind of a cost of the price of education. Now, I will say that educators have done at least I think in this modern era, have done a better job of trying to address the cost of textbooks when you go to college. I know that when I was at the University of Colorado all those years ago, I had to go to the bookstore and of course like line up with whatever class I was taking, with whatever books were required reading for that course, stack a basket full of stuff, bring it to the cash register, and just got like major sticker shock. And I know that many of you still do the same thing, although in this case, you get on Amazon or other, textbook, websites that sell, I should say, websites that sell textbooks, and you've got it that way. But in addition to that, of course, now we have access to, online publishing, which has really, I think, been helpful. I know, like, for example, in this class, this is your textbook right here. You may have hopefully opened it once or twice. It's called Media and Culture. In fact, what's interesting is this book is the 12th edition, right? It's right there on the side. We're going to be this will be the last semester that we teach out of the 12th. We're going to the 13th. So that means that the students next fall purchasing this book for MEA 100, probably going to find it a little more pricey because we've been teaching with this one for a couple of years now. There's a lot of used books out there. And so if someone actually wants a physical copy of a book, you can go on Amazon and usually get this for less than, full retail. So let's pretend though, that this book was full retail. Okay. We'll say that this book's $100, like on your screen there. Okay. Now, $100 is give or take is a good average because there's more, textbooks that certainly cost a lot more than that. There's some that cost less. I mean, I've got a style book here, by the way, for my journalism classes. I'm actually going to get the new one. This is the 2019. But these aren't extremely expensive. They're usually like 20 or 25 bucks, right? But anyway, so what does a $100 textbook cost? What is the percentage of that book? Where does it go, right? Because I've always heard students complain about textbooks, the cost of textbooks, and why are they so expensive? Well, you can see right there, $32. So a third of your book goes to printing, paper, and production. So it's basically the physical task and cost of actually putting together a book. Now, what's interesting is all of that, printing, paper, production, that's all obviously been, like everything else on planet Earth right now, all of those prices are going up. So it would not surprise me to see textbook prices even higher in the fall than they are now, because everything is just, everything's more expensive at the moment. So, or in the spring, spring of 23, they say that, this inflationary cycle we're in could go a while. Anyway, so a third of that, printing, paper, and production, $32 goes, that is priced into your textbook. $15 for administrative costs for the publisher. So the publisher in this case is Bedford St. Martin's. And of course, this isn't the only book that they obviously publish, right, or produce. And so it's a business. And so there are all sorts of people that the Bedford St. Martin's employs that have to be paid, all the way up from their higher ups down to the folks that probably work in the mailroom. In any event, it's the cost of doing business. So $15 of that book goes to the publisher. $12 goes to the author. So in this case, the author, there's three of them: Richard Campbell, Christopher R. Martin, Bettina Fabos. I don't know how much, if like Richard was the main author and these other two kind of helped contribute, or what the breakdown was, but $12 of this book is probably split between those three folks. So if you're just your own author, then every time a book is sold, you're going to get about 12% of that. I don't know if that is a number that is, percentage wise comes as a surprise to you. Is that too high? Is that too low? But the bottom line is it's around $12. $11 wages for bookstore employees. So, I know that it's a really interesting time to be alive in education, and some of you, or maybe many of you, have never even set foot on this campus. But the bottom line is we have a bookstore, and the bookstore has to pay its employees to service you guys who walk in there to buy books. So that's $11 of that book. Marketing is $10. Now, you guys probably wonder, what does that mean? Well, clearly the textbook industry is extremely competitive. And so, we teach out of this book. There are lots of books on my shelf that, have had similar, that have come to me to look at, to try to adopt for MEA 100 in the future or in the past. I get, and not to mention, I get generally several copies of this that just, that I don't have to pay for, either to scout, look, or, to share with my other teachers in our department. The bottom line is that textbooks, books in general, publishers in general will actually spend money, distributing the book to, to places that, they find they feel like they've got a good chance of adopting that book. So that is built into the cost of the textbook. So in this case, 10% of this book, is being spent on the publisher continuing to, essentially reach out to colleges, junior colleges, schools across the country to, essentially adopt this particular textbook. So it's, I will say one of the interesting things is that working at ABC7, as I do part-time on weekends, and I have been for a long time, we do get, we will get books in ABC all the time, where the hope is that we'll reach out to the, the person running the marketing department or doing PR for that particular publisher, and reach out to them and actually say, hey, can we interview, we love this. I mean, here's an example. There's a, if you're watching this in the spring semester of 22, the Phil Mickelson, who's a golfer, his autobiography, I wouldn't say autobiography, I would say, well, his biography is coming out by a gentleman named Alan Shipnuck. And it's one of the more anticipated books to come out in a long time. And I can guarantee you that the publisher, Alan's publisher, has probably sent advanced copies to a lot of different news stations all over the country to hopefully get Alan, to interview Alan for the book, which obviously if people then see that and go, oh, wow, that sounds interesting, hopefully they buy more books, right? So anyway, that's marketing. $7 operation for the store. That's obviously goes to paying rent. Of course, like any business, you pay rent or lease something. $5 profit for the bookstore. So the bookstore only recognizes 5% of profit off your $100 textbook, which I found quite interesting. You have $1 for shipping. There's a lot of, obviously these books get shipped all over the country. They do get a bulk rate, which is good, but still it's $1 for shipping, and that might even go up because of the cost of fuel and whatnot. And then you have the publisher's profit, which is $7, which is just a little bit more than the bookstore. So there's how it breaks down. I don't know if there's a particular number that jumps off the page at you. Now, I will say one of the things that is nice is that, particularly when it comes to this textbook, again, is that, as you saw in my syllabus, you can actually now rent an online version of it, and you don't have to buy it, which is awesome. You just rent it for, 16 or 17 weeks at a certain amount of money, and I think it's an amazing cost savings. So anyway, there's lots of things happening within the the publishing industry and textbook industry to try to address, the rising cost of textbooks. I'm not certainly not a defender of it. I'm just saying that that's, I've seen more with, trying to make it a reasonable cost for students than I have in a long time, which is good. All right, well, let's move on. So I want to talk first about the cultural value of the book, right? Books are agents of social and cultural change. They always have been, they always will be. That is why in many cases, when you hear about stories about censorship, for example, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, the fact is that they are agents of social and cultural change. They have been since the beginning of time. And one of the reasons that they are is because they're free of the need to generate mass circulation for advertisers. So in other words, what you put in a book, it can be very, can be, offbeat, controversial, provocative, whatever it might be. The fact is that there's not really an advertiser tied to your book like there is in television, for example, or, something else. And so therefore, it's, other than censorship, which is still a big deal, obviously, other than censorship, your biggest challenge is, maybe not having your book published, and battling free speech issues. But the bottom line is there's a lot of books out there that have been written that have been extremely controversial, extremely provocative, that rest in our libraries. And, as far as I'm concerned, have every right to rest in our libraries because we have something called the First Amendment. So I'll try to stay off my soapbox on that one. But in any event, books can be offbeat, controversial, revolutionary. Think of here's three right off the bat: Communist Manifesto, which was written by Karl Marx in the late 19th century. Obviously that book has led to a complete, I should say, economic change within government. It's changed history. Obviously, Soviet leaders adopted it with Lenin, first beginning with Lenin in the right after World War I and into the 1920s. And then you had Karl Marx, and I almost feel like we're coming full circle again. But for example, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, very secretive communist nation following Karl Marxian principles. And you even have people here in the United States that who don't believe, who really don't think capitalism is the way to go, and they have embraced Marxism. And so anyway, it's a book that changed history, is what it did, for good or for bad, depending on how you view it. Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe. That's another one that was in the 19th century. That was all about, that a lot of people credit that book with, essentially laying the foundation for ending slavery. That certainly was something that happened right before the Civil War. And there's a lot of historians that point to that particular book, as being something that sort of, primed the pump, if you will, for a significant change in our views towards slavery. Wealth of Nations, The Invisible Hand, Adam Smith, Economics, right? So anyone that's taken economics in high school or in college, maybe you're taking an economics class along with this one, certainly you will probably be introduced to Adam Smith. I was a long time ago, and I'll just be flat out honest, unless I Google Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, I would have to refresh my memory, because it's one of those many general ed courses that, I will wholeheartedly admit that I enjoyed taking at the time, but would need literally to refresh myself. So, but again, a big book, and there's so much more, right? I mean, I'm just, those are three that, I thought of right off the top of my head. All right. Books are also an important cultural repository, in the sense that, do you want to win an argument? You look it up, right? So we often turn to books for certainty and truth in the world in which we live, and in the truths we want to know. Now, what's interesting is I come from an era, where half of my life was internet and half of it wasn't. And so pre-internet, my parents were, awesome enough to, spend money on a set of encyclopedias, that we had on the shelf. And I just vividly my stepfather, who was an avid reader, was constantly walking over to the shelf, to the encyclopedia or some kind of book that he had read. So when we were having an interesting discussion at the dinner table, he was, I'm going to go, he would stand up and he'd go find his book and come back and, read whatever the excerpt is to prove his point. And it's one of those things it's still fresh in my head, even though he died 13 years ago. It's one of those fond memories I have of him, because I at the time, as a 17, 18-year-old kid, I was like, oh, here we go again. But in reality, it was, he was very passionate about winning arguments, and he would use books to, obviously support his position. So what do we do now? Well, we might not race to a book or an encyclopedia, but we race to the internet, right? And oftentimes the internet, if you look, you guys love Wikipedia. Everyone that's the lazy man's way of going, hey, let's find out. Oh, there it is on Wikipedia, right? But the fact is that if you scroll down the Wikipedia page, or if you scroll down the source that you're looking at, oftentimes there's a link, and that originated in a book, believe it or not. So even though we use the internet, and to for better or for worse, to kind of like solidify whatever our opinion is on anything. The fact is that it probably originated in a book. So, all right, books are windows on the past. Okay, now I think this is probably for me one of the reasons that I appreciate books the most that I do, because I'm a huge history fan. I minored in history in college along with majoring in journalism, and I just think one of the coolest things that you can do if you really want to learn about something is to go back and find a book that is fairly close to the time that it's being written about. Because I think that's when it's fresh in someone's head. I also think I think when we read history now, how history is interpreted, we interpret history in 2020 through a 2022 lens, and oftentimes we'll take what we believe in 2022 and apply it 100 years ago. And sometimes I think that just skews history. So I really do feel like, though, that books are windows on the past. So written in times they reflect, books are more accurate representations that are available in modern media. So like, here's a couple. Second World War, Winston Churchill, 6 volumes, the former Prime Minister of England, wrote about his and England's involvement in World War II. Fascinating stuff. Here's another one, the Gulag Archipelago. Alexander, I'll butcher this last name. Forgive me for my anybody that knows Russian or is Russian descent. I think it's Sol Hetenzin. I'm sure that's completely butchered. But anyway, so what is that about? Well, in a nutshell, it's a 3-volume nonfiction text that was written between 1958 and 1968 by a Russian writer and Soviet dissident, Alexander S., I will call him, so I don't butcher his name again. It was first published in 1973 and translated into English and French the following year. It covers the life in what is known as the Gulag, Soviet forced labor camp system, through a narrative constructed from various sources, including reports, interviews, statements, diaries, legal documents, and his own experience as a Gulag prisoner. And in fact, not until the Soviet Union fell in 1989 was it even allowed to be read like for in Russian in Russia. If they caught you with it, that was not good. So, but now it is today. I was going to bring this book out. I don't think I have it on my shelf here. No, I don't. But I was going to another. I will say, if you're looking for another couple of cool books to read about just past stuff, and there's so many out there. I meant to showcase it today, and I, of course, didn't do it. But I watched the HBO had, you probably have heard of HBO's Band of Brothers, and then later they did Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks. They did Band of Brothers, which was all about the 101st Airborne in Europe. When they landed basically on D-Day in 1944 until the end of the war. They did the Pacific, which was the Pacific Theater. Obviously we were fighting Germany on one side, Japan on the other, and they basically developed a miniseries after Band of Brothers called The Pacific, and The Pacific was based on a couple of different books. One that was written by that was published 3 years after the war ended in 1948 by someone that was an Associated Press sports writer who enlisted and wound up at the Battle of Guadalcanal in 1942. And then the other one was written by another gentleman who had enlisted at the age of 17 and later wound up fighting on Okinawa and Peleliu, and I'm just off the top of my head trying to remember all. But anyway, both very gripping and riveting firsthand accounts of what was happening with the vicious fighting that was happening between the U.S. and Japanese soldiers between 1942 and 1945. And so that book was written about 1960-ish by Eugene Sledge. So if you're looking for Robert Leckie, Lecke, and then Eugene Sledge. If you look those guys up, you can find those books that they wrote. You can find them on Amazon. I ordered them. They're absolutely spectacular. So anyway, I know I'm on a tangent, but you can tell I love talking history and books. All right, well, let's keep going here, guys, because that's not what this entire class is about, right? Books are important sources of personal development, okay? Books are wonderful sources of entertainment, escape, and personal reflection. The purchase and reading of a book is a much more individual, personal activity than advertised, supported, or heavily promoted media. So bottom line is that whatever book that you wind up reading is kind of your choice. I mean, obviously, if you're in school, you're going to read assigned material, but outside of school, what you decide ultimately to read is kind of up to you, right? And there's all sorts of different things, like, for example, like on my little desk here, I have this one called Positively Fifth Street. Let me just regale you with the tale for just a split second. In the spring of 2000, Harper's Magazine sent James McManus to Las Vegas to cover the World Series of Poker. I was kind of a fan of poker for a while. In particular, the mushrooming progress of women in the $23 million event and the murder of Ted Binion, the tournament's prodigal host, purportedly done in by a stripper and her boyfriend with a technique so out there it took a Manhattan pathologist to identify it. Whether a jury would convict the attractive young couple was another story altogether. But when McManus sets foot in town, the lure of the tables is too strong. He proceeds to risk his entire Harper's advance in a long shot attempt to play in the tournament. Only with actual experience at the table can he capture the half-raising subtleties of this kind of poker that determines the world champion. The heart of the book is deliciously suspenseful account of the tournament itself, the players, the hands, and his own likely progress in it, and talks about the trial. Now, how did I know about this? Because I was on a flight, and People magazine, I think it was People, recommended the book, so I picked it up. History, by the way, if you're into it, USS Indianapolis. This is called In Harm's Way by Doug Stanton. I found out about this on Shark Week on Discovery Channel years ago. Basically, it's all about the USS Indianapolis. You don't know what that is. It's the ship that carried the bomb on a top secret mission, the atomic bomb in the Pacific that would later be dropped on Japan, and upon coming back was sunk by a Japanese submarine. And basically, let's see, July 30th, 1945, it was torpedoed. An estimated 300 men were killed upon impact. Close to 900 sailors were cast in the Pacific Ocean, where they struggled to stay alive, battered by a savage sea and fighting off sharks, hypothermia, and dementia. By the time help arrived, nearly 4 days and nights later, all but 317 men had died. Anyway, it's all about that. And and what's interesting is if you've ever watched the movie Jaws, there's a really classic scene in there where they actually mention the USS Indianapolis. And then for my folks that like horse racing or just stories of horses, this is called Ghost Horse. The Ghost Horse is the inspiring true tale of a one-eyed, club-footed thoroughbred racehorse and a journeyman trainer, Tim Snyder, who scraped together every penny he had to purchase the broken and unwanted filly. Snyder helped the horse overcome its deficiencies, eventually naming her in part after his deceased wife. Lisa, the great and only love of his life, a bright and sweet-tempered woman whose gentle demeanor seemed eerily reflected in the horse. Anyway, so it's kind of he falls in love with like training this horse, and it like reminds him of his wife, and it's really cool. So again, this is called The Ghost Horse, a true story of love, death, and redemption. So that's just 3 on my shelf. There's more here, but anyway, the fact is that it's very personal. It's very cool. It's very entertaining, and I'm sure you guys, hopefully, I read about in your discussion topic that's connected to this module. I'm really interested to see what kind of books you guys throw out there for me. Books are also mirrors of the culture, and that is going to lead into censorship, because basically as our opinions change, as we start to look at culture, books really readily follow. So I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, summer of 2020, George Floyd happened, and of course that cast a new light on, I think, the racial relations in this country, the history of Black America in this country, and there has been a number of books on critical race and all this other stuff that has since, dominated, I would say for sure social media and dominated our national conversation. So, which has been interesting because it's led to some pretty interesting, censorship issues over the last 2 years. So let's talk about that. And this is one of those things where I got to be honest with you. I wish we had a live chat where we could talk about censorship, because I'd love to hear your opinions on it. Heck, if you're watching this video and you want to comment and be respectful about it, you're welcome to even put comments down in the YouTube comment section watching this video if you like. But in any event, censorship, because of their influence, meaning books, as cultural repositories and agents of social change, books have been targeted for censorship. Okay. Oh, you know what? I meant to, let me see. You know what? I will put this link up on your module. This is South Park's take on it. It's very interesting and comedic, of course, as South Park always is. But I'll make sure that you guys get an opportunity to see that on if I put it up now, I think YouTube will probably take it down with, speaking of like copyright stuff. So in any event, check that out. Check out that link. I'll make sure it's working, in your module. All right, but let's talk about your 2021 most banned list. I provided a link for you if you want to go ahead and click on that while you listen to this. But and again, I will say you might have a little bit of trouble with it. So if you do, maybe send me a note and I'd be happy to like copy and paste it. It's actually out of the New York Times. In fact, you know what? I'll just, let me just share it with you real quick, because it's on my other screen here. And I think you'll get a kick out of looking at this. Book banning efforts surged in 2021. These titles were the most targeted. Most targeted books are about Black and LGBTQ people. According to the American Library Association, the country's polarized politics has fueled the rise. And they have pictures of the different books out there that have been targeted. Attempts to ban books in the United States surged in 2021 to the highest level since the American Library Association began tracking book challenges 20 years ago, the organization said Monday. Most of the targeted books were by or about Black and LGBTQ people, the association said. Book challenges are a perennial issue at school board meetings and libraries. More recently, efforts fueled by the country's intensely polarized political environment have amplified by social media, where lists of books some consider to be inappropriate for children circulate quickly and widely. Challenges to certain titles have been embraced by some conservative politicians, cast as an issue of parental choice and parental rights. Those who oppose these efforts, however, say that prohibiting the books violates the rights of parents and children who want those titles to be available. Quote, what we're seeing right now is an unprecedented campaign to remove books from school libraries, but also public libraries that deal with the lives and experience of people from marginalized communities, said Deborah Caldwell-Stone, the director of American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. Quote, we're seeing organized groups go to school boards and library boards and demand actual censorship of these books in order to conform to their moral or political views. The Library Association said it counted 729 challenges last year to library, school, and university materials, as well as research databases and ebook platforms. Each challenge can contain multiple titles, and the association tracked 1,597 individual books that were either challenged or removed. The count is based on voluntary reporting by educators and librarians and on media reports, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you can scroll down here and it will tell you genderqueer is number 1, lawn boy number 2, which is, let's see, Evason's, I had not heard of this book. Jonathan Evason follows a young Mexican-American man who worked as a landscaper, is coming to terms with his sexual identity. All boys aren't blue. Anyway, you can take a look at this stuff. Now, let me stop share. Well, let me share something with you while we're looking at this. So what's interesting, guys, is that we are seeing obviously a movement by folks on the right to show up at school board meetings and put pressure on school districts to, obviously filter books that are on shelves in libraries, either through a racial lens or through a gender lens. But not all is just coming from the right. There's also pressure coming from folks on the left. So for example, here's another article that you guys should probably see now. And again, I'll try to provide links to these things on your module so that you can see it, you can read it yourself. But in fact, let's do something local here. So this was from last November. The Heart District up here in Santa Clarita at one point actually paused books from a mandatory reading list for their local schools and then unpaused these books. And so the William S. Hart Union High School District unpaused 2 books, To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn, that had been removed from a mandatory reading list due to concerns about their content. Now, if you've ever read these books, they're classics, obviously. And these books, but believe it or not, prior to, I think, George Floyd in 2020, these books were amongst the most probably targeted for censorship, but not in the way that you think. The books had been in a literature limbo since early this year, available in the library, but paused from being part of the district's reading curriculum. According to Dave Caldwell, a spokesman for the Hart District, a group was assembled by the Director of Curriculum and Assessment, David LeBaron. The goal was to evaluate the reading list of books English teachers have access to teach. The pause came in response to concerns that books might contain material offensive to some people, and district officials wanted to ensure that things are being looked at through a more modern lens. Some folks had objected to certain language that was being used in some of the books, so a group of parents, students, teachers, administrators all came together, talked about it, Caldwell said. There were multiple meetings during the spring with the task force working on a new protocol to examine the books and review the new curriculum reading list. So the deal is that because these books were written in earlier times where we had perhaps different language and a different attitude toward racism and racial discussion and racial discourse, that, you know, for example, in Huckleberry Finn and in Tom Sawyer, the N-word is, of course, used. In fact, there's a character, if I remember, I think it's in Huckleberry Finn, that's, you know, N Jim, right? And so that obviously in 2022 is clearly, you know, an offensive term. But should we be taking those books out of circulation, out of curriculum, because it's, you know, it's a triggering word, it's a triggering topic, whatever you want to call it? You know, I've had lots of discussions with students in the past in class about this, and, you know, maybe you can take a second to reflect on whether that should be, you know, stuff that is removed, because we've seen it now with not just books, but for example, there was talk of, for a time, HBO had taken down Gone with the Wind before finally putting it back up with a disclaimer. Should we be, you know, should we be banning books? Should we be taking books off shelves for either, you know, for having stories that, you know, reflected that time and used that type of language and that type of, you know, theme at it, you know, and should we be taking down books on the other side from the right, pressuring school district to take down books because we're teaching children about, you know, the different, you know, attitudes towards gender these days. And also, you know, there's folks that, you know, clearly are seeing history, American history in particular, in a different lens. Should we stop people being introduced to that? And my feeling is, honestly, no. I think both sides are wrong. I think that part of the beauty of being in the United States is the idea that we have a First Amendment, that we should be introduced to different things. And, you know, maybe there's an argument to be made about age appropriate. I think that's certainly something that, you know, maybe some of you probably are thinking right now, well, is it okay to teach certain things to 6-year-olds versus someone who's 15 or 16? I would agree with you, yes. But I think in general, I personally, you know, again, I don't reflect the opinion of the entire college, but I get very leery of censorship. I don't like it. I don't like it in film. I don't like it in books. I don't like it in television. I just don't like it. And I think, you know, how do we learn if we don't, you know, we don't talk, you know, we basically, you know, we don't publish books that were historical in nature or take them off shelves. How do we learn from, you know, our past mistakes or see our differences that, you know, exist between 2022 and late 19th century, like when Mark Twain was writing Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. So anyway, last article here, I'll actually I'll link this, but whereas the Hart District has unpaused these same books, there's literally in early January, there's a school district in Washington State that basically is pulling the books off of its curriculum for the reasons that the Hart District was at one point and now is not. So anyway, it's all a very tangled web, that is, censorship. But, again, take a moment to reflect on that, because I think you'll find that that's interesting. All right. I'm going to stop right there, and we will pick up the history part of this and then circle back to modern times in part 2, because this is a lot to absorb. But in the meantime, before I say goodbye in part 1 here, please do me a favor and do reflect on what we talked about with censorship. I think we'd have a much larger discussion if we did this in person, but I certainly think that censorship is continues to be a big part of is synonymous with the book publishing industry. It's synonymous with school boards and school districts and school curriculum. And so take a moment to, tool around on the internet, if you will, and educate yourself on what is happening with censorship. All right, so I'm going to stop right there. When you click on the next YouTube link, it will have part 2. We'll talk about history, and then again, kind of circle back to the modern ways of what we call ebooks. So anyway, that is it for now. We'll see you in part 2 at whatever time you click on it.